Hello, Brubs. We're back with The Sorcerer's Apprentice by Heinz Ewers. A 1927 translation of his first in a trilogy, the Frank Braun trilogy, by the John Day Company. Illustrated by Mablon Blaine and translated by Ludwig Levison. And we are on chapter 15, the second from last chapter. Nope. Don't look at my Kroger receipt. Chapter 15. Out, out are the lights. Out, all over and over each quivering form, the curtain, a funeral pall, comes down with the rush of a storm. Edgar Allan Poe, the conqueror worm. His head hit against the hard stone. Now his face, too, was stained with blood. He lay there unconscious. He was in their way. They seized him, carried him aside, and threw him among the tangled bushes of the slope. Then they knelt and prayed, O Lamb of God. There he lay and did not stir, but in his ears rang piercingly the saint's cry. Her cry, her fearful, horrible cry of death, the cry that tore all veils and pierced all fogs, and brought the heavens down in ruins and hurled them to the ultimate abysses of hell. That cry annihilated him. He crept down through the bushes carefully on all fours. Like a beast wounded to death, only away, away. Was there not some hole in which he could bury himself? He seized stones and blackberry bushes, and under him the loose pebbles rattled down into the crevasse. Away, away. Then he came to a place where the land jutted out a little. He could go no farther. The cliff fell steeply into the lake. He stood up and thought. Something sounded above him. Ah, her voice, once again. His ears listened intently, and in the awful silence he heard the low words of her who was dying. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Away, away, everything disappeared. He saw nothing, heard nothing. Only one thing raced through his fevered nerves. Away, away. So he leaped down the mountainside. Oh, it was good to fly through the air. He fell. He fell for many hours. And the lake received him softly and gently and did him no harm. He dipped down almost to the bottom, he thought. Now I am at home. And it seemed a sweet thought to him to lie on the moist bottom. But the lake raised him up and gave him no refuge. Spat him forth again as though he were unclean. He gasped for air instinctively like an animal. He divided the water and swam diagonally across the lake. He climbed on shore close to Raimondi's house. Thoughtlessly he approached it. Then, at the steps, he stood still. What did he want here? He looked upward. Ah, the sun was far behind the hills. Val d'Escodra lay in deep shadow, but perhaps the car which would carry him away was not yet gone. Up then, up the mountains to the road. He dared not turn his head backwards to the promontory of the crosses. He ran. He saw the goat path at his right. And there he is, away, away. He fled up it. His breath came in gasps. His garments dried upon his body and were drenched again in his sweat. Suppose they were all after him. Suppose they were after him. Suppose they had seen him leap down from the promontory and swim across the lake. Suppose they were to catch him who had given the saint her death blow on the cross. A humiliating fear drove him, a dread, as if death were upon him. Were they not emerging from yonder arbor? Did he not hear the heavy steps and the gurgling voice of Skuro? Suppose the giant seized him with his claws. Suppose he spat upon him as upon the sweet saint. Ah, he would not be able to lift a hand to defend himself. He heard a crackling in the bushes. He heard it. Unmistakably, he dragged himself and leaped. He saw the road 10 paces ahead of him, and even now, in his terror, he fell upon his knees. He crept to one side and hid in the bushes. Perhaps they would rush past him. It came nearer, nearer up the path. He closed his eyes and pressed his hot head into the grass. But he knew well that it would be useless, and his heart seemed to throb in his very mouth. It was Marfa the goat. She came nearer, and with her rough tongue licked his face tenderly. "Is it you? You?" he whispered. Painfully he raised himself up. He clung to the animal's tether and let her drag him upward. Thus he arrived upon the road. Angelo was sitting on his handbag. As the motor car passed, he asked hastily. The fellow answered, "No, sir, not yet." He drew a deep breath. He was saved. He waited. He walked up and down the road and peered with all his might toward Monte Almego, where, like a bright stripe, a stretch of road was visible. There the car would first come in sight. We skipped the page. And yet it did not come, did not come. He listened as with 100 ears, listened up the street for the noise of the motor, and listened down toward Val d'Escodra whether there was not some noise from the devil hunters pursuing him. Would it not be better to follow the road? Then he would gain upon the car. But he knew that he could not go 100 paces. He was wearied to death. His limbs felt broken. He stood at the edge of the road, held fast to a hazelnut branch, and peered toward the west. Then something crept toward his feet and seemed to pass by his legs. He started violently, then he remembered. "Go away, Marfa." But it was not the goat. It was a human being, Sibylla Medruzzo. He clung to the young tree so as not to fall. There crept the old beggar woman, as on the first day when he had set foot in the valley. Her back was bent. Thrust forward was she, as taut as a bow, so that her tangled gray hair and head were scarcely above the level of her hips. She turned her face to the left, moved her dumb lips, and squinted strangely upward. She leaned on her short staff and held out her right hand, begging for alms. He dared not question her. He gave her a handful of silver coin and retreated shyly to one side. "Go away," he whispered, "go away." Was she not healed after all? Had it all been only a wild dream? Had he never left this road and fared down into the magic valley of Scodra? No, no, vividly the image stood before him on the first devil's fight, in all its immediacy, almost ready to be grasped. He stood in the prophet's hall, far at the end, near the long bench, and Teresa stood next to him, and her arm was about his neck, and she held his hands and nestled close to him. Teresa, in those days, she was still Teresa. And the red torches glowed through the hall, and Pietro stood under the image of Christ, and his first disciples flourished their scourges. He saw once more how painfully the old beggar woman tried to make her way through the crowd, how she tugged at her dress and her wrap, how she thrust with her cane in order to get through, how she crouched before the prophet, how she scrawled her wish on a slip of paper. How the wild wife of Veneer loosened her skirts, and how the thorny rod descended upon her aged shoulders, and how she had raised herself up, first knelt, then drew herself up to her full height. How her body, which had been bent in a horrible cramp for 30 long years, drew itself up and towered above all the bystanders by a full head. She was healed, and it had been a miracle, and now she crept about again, pitifully contorted, writhed on the ground like a trodden worm, and it seemed to him as though she were more bent, stiffer, and more wretched than ever. He recalled that he had seen her no longer in the meetings of the devil hunters since he returned from Semigo. So brief, so pitifully brief had her happiness been. "Hello, Robs." Then he thought perhaps she was lying, perhaps she only played the part of the paralyzed beggar, and was well and sound, sounder than himself. Perhaps she had been stationed here by the peasants to watch him, to hold him fast, to jump at his throat at the last moment. Was she not calling? This is The Sorcerer's Apprentice by Heinz Ewers. Was she not calling? Was she not making a sign down the hill with her staff? He turned about horrified and looked after her, but with infinite pains and slowness she limped to her stone. She sat down, and he could not see her face, weather-beaten, ruined, as though carved of brown worm-eaten wood. No, no, she was not lying. She was paralyzed and bent. and only the miracle was a lie. Hello, Browse. She was Sibylla Madruzel, the old beggar woman. And he thought, the saint, oh, the saint, never, he cried aloud, never, never. She hangs on the cross, and I stabbed. He held both hands to his face. Never, never, he cried. And the steep walls of Monte Almego caught the sound and threw it back. Never, never. He bit his lips. Why was he crying so? Did he want to summon the pursuers? Breathlessly he peered toward the west. Would the motor never come? Never. He went to Angelo. He wanted to ask him to help him when the enemies came, but he did not speak. He could not speak. He looked at the man as he sat there in his broad content. He had put his right arm about the goat's neck. His left hand played with her udders. You are happy, he thought. You alone. He asked, how long have you been here? All afternoon. Do you know what happened down there? Angelo shook his head. No, sir. Did you not hear any noise? Angelo grinned slowly. Oh, yes, I heard a kind of screaming. How does it concern me, sir? Frank Braun said, no, no, it doesn't concern you. You are not from hereabouts. He left him standing and ran into the middle of the road. There it comes, he cried. There it comes. On the top of Monte Amelgo, the car came into view, raced swiftly across the narrow strip of road which one could see, and hid itself in a cloud of white dust. Then he heard the hard hum of the motor, and now it came nearer and nearer like an arrow. Hello, Robs. The chauffeur blew his short horn, but Frank Braun stood still, stretched out his arms, and forced him to stop. What do you want? The chauffeur asked angrily. I want to go with you. Frank Braun answered. I can't take you. You see, all the places are occupied. Frank Braun came close up to him and seized his arm. You must take me away, he cried. I'll throw myself under the wheels if you don't. The chauffeur looked at him in surprise. He felt that this man was in earnest. Sir, he said to his neighbor, would you mind moving aside a little? Grumbling and shaking his head, the gentleman did so. Frank Braun climbed up and wedged himself in next to the chauffeur. Angelo shoved the bag between the knees of the passengers and stretched out his hand. What do you want? Frank Braun asked him. Angelo grinned, pulled out his 10-crown note and waved it. Frank Braun threw at him, without looking at it, another bill. It fluttered in the air and fell into the dust. Angelo picked it up and glanced at it swiftly. Then he jumped with a frightened face toward the car and held it up again. Sir, said the chauffeur, you have given the fellow 100 crowns. Keep it, Frank Braun cried. Keep it. He pressed the chauffeur's arm. For heaven's sake, drive on. Shrugging his shoulders, the chauffeur jumped down and cranked the engine. Involuntarily, Frank Braun turned his head and cast a last glance into the valley. And across the bushes he saw the promontory by the lake with its 4 tall, mighty crosses. Drive on, he cried in his mad fear. Drive on. The chauffeur jumped up. At last the wheels were turning. At last. At last. Now he breathed more freely. After a while he asked, will we get to the city in time to catch the evening steamer? No, said the chauffeur. Quite certainly not. Behind Monte Almego I had a little accident, hence the delay. And anyhow, it doesn't matter. All the passengers are guests of our hotel. They are staying and would not leave tonight anyhow. But I must leave, said Frank Braun. A new terror overcame him. The peasants would miss him. They would seek for him. They would ask Angelo and Sibylla Madruzo. They would hear that he had gone to the city, and they would start after him and march all night long. That was an awkward pause. And next morning they would be standing guard under his window, or they might make their way into the hotel, into his very room, and seize him and drag him back to Val d'Escodra, to the promontory of the crosses, to the saint who hung up there. Oh, he was not safe in the city. He had to get away from there too. That very evening they must lose all trace of him. He wiped the sweat from his forehead. He forced himself to talk calmly. Do you hear? He said to the chauffeur. I must reach the steamer this very evening, at any price. Get all the speed out of your machine you can. You saw me give that fellow 100 crowns, didn't you? You'll get 3 times as much if you arrive in time. The chauffeur thought a moment, sighed, and shook his head. I'm sorry enough, he answered. God knows I'd like to earn the money, but it's impossible. If the steamer hasn't suffered as long a delay as I have, it can't be done. Frank Braun whispered, "Drive on, then. Drive on." Perhaps it was delayed. Then another thought came to him. Wouldn't it be possible to drive to the next station at which the steamer stops? We might diminish the distance so and succeed in reaching it. The other shook his head. "No, sir, there's no road in that direction." They fell silent. Feverishly, Frank Braun sought for a way out. Nothing, nothing. Oh, they would catch him in the end. It was as though Skurrow's red goiter were already quivering above his face. Then a postilion's horn was heard. The chauffeur steered to the left, and they passed the stagecoach, which came toward them. He looked into it. There sat the innkeeper next to a strong, ugly woman. Frank Braun ducked. Had Ramonde seen him? And now they would surely come to fetch him from the city. They would tell the landlord that it was he who gave that final stab. They would come with him, all of them, all. Venier's wife would strike her claws into his flesh, and the dirty Elvasi would seize his hand. The prophet would lead them, and Ratty and Ranchi would stride in front of him when they brought him back in their triumphal procession. What would they do with him? First, they would wait for 3 days for the saint to arise as she had predicted, and for 3 days and 3 long nights he would have to lie by her open grave. But then, when she did not arise from her grave, when the great hope was shattered, when the frightful light of common day with its terrible clearness wiped out all their holy madness. Ah, he would fare even as young Ulpo had said. They would seize him in their raging madness and hurl him alive into the sulphurous sea of flame. They would read him with their teeth and stew about the fragments of him and feed the birds with his flesh. A fever shook him, his teeth rattled. In blind fear he hid his head in his hands. After a while, the chauffeur said softly, "Perhaps we could drive to Tremosino. That isn't far. It's the station ahead." "Drive on," the German whispered. The chauffeur hesitated. "Even then, we'll catch the steamer only if she has been delayed. Besides, Tremosina lies at the top of the mountain. To be sure, there's a cable car down to the lake, but it's not without danger. Only people of the place use it, and not all of them. And then I could get you to Tremosino, but I'm not able to tell whether you'll meet the steamer." Frank Braun said, "Try it. You'll get your money in any event." Please stop typing. The chauffeur turned the car back. There you go. Now you're done. The chauffeur turned the car back. "Whither now?" Frank Braun asked. "The road to Tremosino leads to the right from the main road. We've already passed it, but it's a loss of hardly 4 minutes." "Scarcely 4 minutes," cried Frank Braun. 4 minutes. Drive on, man, as hard as your motor can go." They raced through the twilight and up a miserable road. The car jumped like a ball over stones in hard furrows, and threw the scolding passengers from their seats and shook them up. It was entirely dark when they reached the place. The chauffeur jumped down and hailed the peasants loudly. He asked whether the steamer had passed. "It's just coming," someone answered. He jerked out the handbag and threw it to the people. "Take the gentleman down," he cried. Frank Braun gave him his money and ran with the peasants to the cliff. The cable car was old and in wretched condition, meant only to carry provisions up and down. The iron vehicles were scarcely larger than a strong basket. He jumped into one, a peasant with his bag into another. A whistle sounded, and the small cars moved and crept with infinite slowness almost vertically down the mountainside. He saw the steamer. It was making good speed and seemed to have no intention of stopping. Above, he heard both the chauffeur and the peasants calling. They beckoned with lights and howled out into the night to the captain to stand by. Then they cried to those below to get a boat in readiness. Now the cable car went faster. It seemed as though the iron car were suddenly dropping. It bumped hard against the ground. Frank Braun toppled over forward and hit his forehead against the hard edge. Stout arms lifted him out, hurried him to the shore, and threw him into the boat. They seized the oars and pulled out into the lake toward the steamer, the lights of which were slowly withdrawing into the darkness. The boatmen cried and roared. Finally, the steamer stopped. Frank Braun climbed on board, but he found no rest and no sense of security. His thoughts became confused. Hadn't the people from Val d'Escodra already reached the city? Were they already waiting, ready to fall upon him on the ship's arrival? With long strides, he ran across the deck, back and forth from one railing to the other. Then they reached the city and the steamer stopped. The landing pier was almost empty, and on shore, too, there stood but a few people. He peered carefully around. No, no one was there. On the pier, in an open shed, he saw his trunks standing. He released them and had them brought on board. Every moment he peered down the dark valleys to look for one of the devil hunters. Someone came running from the square toward the pier. He was frightened again. Didn't it look like Opal? Like young Giovanni Opal? Then he remembered that young Opal was dead. And now he saw, too, that it was the porter of some hotel. The steam whistle shrieked. Once, twice, thrice, the gangplank was pulled in and the railing closed. The engine started and the side wheels dipped into the water. He stood aft and looked back and saw the city disappear with its last lights. Now they might come. Now he had fled. They might throw themselves into the lake and swim after him like dogs. They would never reach him now. His terror had disappeared, but there remained a passionate restlessness. He knew well now that he was safe, even though his fear had had more foundation than mere fancy, and yet he gazed sharply toward the shore and watched closely the deep blue waters of Lake Garda, as though at any moment the huge goiter of Girolamo Skirl might emerge from it. The steamer reached its final landing, but it had missed connection with the train that went on the great northward road. The travelers climbed into carriages, chaffered with the boatmen, and scattered in all directions. But Frank Braun didn't want to stay, not even here. He wanted to go as far as possible. A last train was leaving on the narrow gauge road. He took it. He sat wedged in among vintners and forest peasants and held his handbag firmly on his knees. He stared straight ahead and sank into dull, apathetic brooding. His thoughts were unable to any longer to grasp anything. His lips moved softly and formed over and over again the same disconsolate the same disconsolate words. O Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. A conductor roused him. Do you intend to keep sitting here? He asked roughly. Frank Braun looked about him distraught. He was alone. No, he stammered. He was at Mori. He went to the ticket office of the main road and asked for a ticket. He was told that the next train didn't leave till morning. And there's no train through here tonight, he asked. No, said the agent. Only an express train going south. How far? Through to Venice. When is it due? The agent looked at the clock. Immediately, he answered. It ought to be here in 5 minutes. Frank Braun sighed with relief. Give me a ticket. He boarded the train. With some trouble, he succeeded in getting a stateroom. He closed the door heavily. He let himself fall on the bed. Then came the conductor, then the inspector, then the sleeping car official. Every minute, another interruption. The tears almost came into his eyes. Why do they torment me? He whispered. Alas, he had to get out to have his luggage examined. He opened his trunks and stood silently while the custom officials turned his things over. Anything subject to duty? He shook his head. At last he was back in the train. He undressed and lay down, only to sleep, but he did not sleep. He counted every quiver of the car and every beat of his heart. It beat slowly enough, but heavily and deeply, and seemed to come up in his throat. He listened to the bumps of the rolling train. Now I am back where I was, he thought, conquered, beaten, trodden underfoot. Once again, it would never be any different. And however cleverly he assumed the mask, and however proudly he strode along, a Danton, a Caesar Borgia, the mask would fall after all. For he stood there naked and desperate, Hamlet, and he frightful Cain's mark of knowledge gleamed, and the frightful Cain's mark of knowledge gleamed on his forehead. Then his will fled. Reason and intellect, yes, they recognized well what was and what happened, but they had no power to conquer. They dragged on their feet with heavy, leaden weight of reflection, which held them all life through. Thus was strength broken in a mere game. Thus was power shattered in a purposeless, phantasmal battle. But the will raced along, stupid and happy, and shattered worlds, and created them anew, and leaped lightly from deed to deed. Oh, this beautiful mask of the will! Now it lay in the torrid dusk of Val d'Escodra, bloody stained, soiled, and tattered. He cried out after his will, and every fiber of his body thirsted fervidly and grew faint in a wild yearning for action. But his thoughts laughed aloud and said, "Whoever preaches the will, he is a weakling." Never had Zarathustra been so soft and so weak as when he cried, "Grow hard." And Nietzsche had felt clearly that this was true. And from the recognition of this truth arose the tragedy that drove him into madness. He was an apprentice, and no sorcerer like himself. A fly crept across his face. He put out his hand and seized it between two fingers. Grow hard. He laughed bitterly, and 100 thoughts chased each other at once. What for? Let it fly. What did you want to do with its wretched bit of life? He opened the window and threw the insect out. Grow hard, he sobbed. The man of will would have destroyed it without a thought. It would have died between his fingers, and the event of its death would scarcely have penetrated to this man's brain. But he had to think and to reflect. He was incurable. Never would his longing be fulfilled. His impassioned longing for the mask which he loved so well. And yet, perhaps, some day, in the end, in madness, then at last his thoughts would be free of the terror of knowledge. Then would the chain be broken with which his reason had forged. Then would his will range free and glad and shatter worlds and create them. Yes, then. Was it not best to be mad? He leaned against the window and stared out into the night. He saw the names of stations, read letters and words without realizing what they meant. He threw himself on the bed, buried his head in the pillows, and bit his teeth into them. O Lamb of God, that takest away the sins of the world, have mercy upon us. He got up and dressed again. He ran through the train from end to end. Then he came back and sat down with his head in his hands. Day came, and the train raced across the lagoons. Over Venice lay the first old poisonous glimmer of morning that he hated so. He entered a gondola. With closed eyes he floated over the canals. When he mounted the stairs of his hotel he faltered and fell. The porter caught him in his arms. "You are ill, sir," he said. He led him to his room and helped him undress. He ran down and brought a bottle of vermouth. Greedily Frank Braun drank 3 large glassfuls. Then he fell on the bed. He slept heavily for hours. When he awoke, he lay still for a moment. Then he pulled himself together, jumped up, rang, and ordered a cold bath. Only not to think, only to be doing something. He shaved himself carefully and then entered the bath. The cold water refreshed him. He felt as though he were rinsing off a 5 months' accumulation of thick dust. He dressed himself, took his hat, and went out. He walked across the square of St. Mark's, sat down at a little table of the Café Quadri, and breakfasted. The waiter brought him a newspaper. He read eagerly and was as interested in every detail as though he had followed the events from day to day. When he had read every line, he put the paper away and looked across the square, which gleamed in the warm sun of a late September day. It was almost empty. Only far over near the wooden structure of the campanile, fresh-looking English children were feeding the doves. He looked toward St. Mark's and toward the procurator's palace. Strange, he had sat there. I can't speak. Strange, he had sat here 100 times and knew every stone, and yet it all seemed strange to him today, so dreamlike and unreal. He hung his head and stared at the paving stones, and from somewhere the wind carried to him these words: "Then you will flee, and eternal death will drive you onward, over seas and hills, through long valleys and broad plains. I see you sitting on a great square, and the sun shining upon white marble. Round about arise tall palaces, but you are looking silently on the ground." The saint's words, he thought, but all All excitement had died, and he was almost surprised at the heavy calm of his soul. Now someone will call me, he murmured, and someone did call his name. He did not look up and was not astonished. Thus it had to be. Frank Braun, cried the voice. Frank Braun. He knew the voice well. Who was that? It was not the voice of the saint. And yet her voice sounded from this strange one, and he whispered her words. Someone calls your name, but you hear my voice. He arose and said aloud, and the clouds cover the sun. The lady laughed. You've made a profound observation, Frank Braun, and an astrologer would envy you. A shadow passes over St. Mark's Square, and without looking up, your philosophical mind draws the remarkable conclusion that a cloud is passing over the sun. It's astonishing. He turned to the beautiful woman who stretched out her hand. Lottie Levy, he said. Lottie Levy. Or is it Levy or Levy? The Phoenician lady. Am I still a Phoenician? She laughed. Still, he repeated, red hair, green eyes with thin black lines under them, slender as Baltus, and nails stained with henna, virginal breasts that know all vices and yearn to invent new ones. He turned his head and looked around. Aren't those your parents over there? She nodded, yes. They're over there at the jeweler's. I hope they'll buy me the rope of pearls that I like, she laughed. Again, just keep still, she continued. I know very well what you're thinking. Father Levy, a little knock-kneed, short, thick lips, heavy nose, and clever eyes. Mother Levy, but no, she'd be too horrified, and so Frau Geheim Kammerseinritin Levy, that can't be helped. Nie Ludmilla, Baroness von Kubeck, emphasized. If you please, tall, large-boned, still handsome, and a trifle stupid. And finally, Lottie Brand. Tiergarten, is that right? Yes, said he, that's right. The best kind of mixed blood. You ought to put wild cherries in your hair. She laughed lightly, or myrtles and orange blossoms. For 3 weeks I have been the fiancé of a count. Mamma is charmed. He said it's a pity. It'll spoil the strain. She came close to him and looked at him sharply. I'm 25 years old, 25. For whom shall I wait? Do you expect me to marry you? Heaven forbid, he laughed. Marry your count, by all means, but don't have any children. At least not by him. She was vexed. You are insupportable. He gave her a chair and sat down himself. Oh, Lottie, you don't believe that yourself. She leaned both elbows on the table and looked straight at him. Very well, I don't believe it. I'll let you have it your way, but you must promise me to go out with me this evening. Where to? Her glance lay in wait, ready to leap upon its prey. It doesn't matter, she said. I don't know yet. I'll lead you. Good, he said. Besides, I might as well tell you. I'm delighted. I'm glad we met. You are? She spoke lightly, almost indifferently. Well, so am I. I was bored here. He took her hand and kissed it. That is your hand, Lottie. Unmistakably yours. Clever and cruel. She laughed aloud. Oh, you're the last one to say that. Has anyone crueler or more brutal claws than you have? He fell silent, and a bitter expression came upon his lips. The mask, he thought. That wretched mask. She looked at him long. After a while she asked, What are you doing here at this time? The season is beginning in Berlin. Your friends expect you. He nodded wearily. Yes, he said in a worn voice. I'll go there. Again she was silent for a while. Then she said, You seem to have been wiped out of existence for 6 months. In what part of the earth have you been? What have you been doing? And where do you come from? He got up quickly, but he felt faint and had to grasp the edge of the table. His face was pale and his eyes stared into space. Where do I come from? From the mountains, from a hole in the mountains. What did I do there? Oh, I looked into the bowels of the earth. She touched his arm. And did you dance on the witch's mountain? And did you celebrate a Sabbath with Satan? She laughed ironically. Confess now. He shook his head wearily. Perhaps I've only been writing a novel. She gave him her hand. There are my parents. Call at the hotel if you want to. It's the Danieli. Tonight at 9. Don't make me wait. All right, he nodded. That can't be the end of the chapter. Or can it? 'Tis the end of the chapter. And only chapter 16 awaits now. Oh, my arm. All right, Bobs, that's all. What's there, only 7 pages? Yes, 7 pages left. But I must eat breakfast, so that's all, bros.